Part 1. Have you ever felt watched? Not in the crowded street, public kind of way, but that chilling feeling in your own home, a prickling on the back of your neck when you're utterly alone. Tonight, we're not just exploring that feeling, we're building a conduit for it. We're diving into a DIY project unlike any other, a haunted dollhouse. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That's just a bit of harmless fun, right? Well, let's just say some hobbies have a way of evolving. This isn't about crafting a cute miniature home. It's about something far more unsettling. We're venturing into the possibility of unintentional summoning, of creating a focal point for energies we may not fully understand. And before you dismiss it as mere superstition, consider this. What if the act of meticulously recreating a domestic space, imbuing it with your own energy and intentions, inadvertently opens a door? What if, by painstakingly furnishing each room, we're not just building a house, but also an invitation? Stick around, and let's unlock these mysteries together. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next as we delve further into this unsettling experiment. Because the truth about haunted objects is this: they're not always waiting to be found. Sometimes they're waiting to be built. And sometimes they're already inside. Part 2. The unsettling question hangs in the air. Are we constructing a haven or a trap? Each miniature chair, each tiny painting, are they innocent details, or are they components of a larger, more sinister design? Let's consider the historical precedent. The Victorians, fascinated by death and the occult, often used dollhouses as a means to explore their anxieties about mortality and the afterlife. Could we be inadvertently replicating that practice, amplifying dormant energies with each addition to our tiny dwelling? Think about it. We meticulously recreate domestic scenes, echoing the lives that once unfolded within real walls. Are we unintentionally summoning echoes of those lives, spirits drawn to the familiar comfort of a home, however small? The more lived in we make the dollhouse, the more plausible it becomes as a vessel for residual energy, for echoes of past inhabitants seeking a place to reside. And what about the materials themselves? Wood, fabric, paper. All possess their own histories, their own subtle imprints of the past. Could these materials be acting as conduits, amplifying any latent supernatural potential within the dollhouse? Perhaps that antique lace we used for the curtains wasn't just a charming detail, but a beacon, a siren call to something lurking just beyond our perception. The notion that we're not discovering, but building, a haunting, is a chilling one. It suggests that the power isn't inherent within an object, but rather that we imbue it with that power through our intentions, our actions, and our very belief in the possibility of the supernatural. We are, in essence, crafting our own ghost story, one tiny room at a time. But what happens when the story begins to write itself? What happens when the inhabitants of our miniature world begin to dictate the narrative? Part 3. But what happens when the story begins to write itself? What happens when the inhabitants of our miniature world begin to dictate the narrative? This is where the line between creator and participant blurs, where the DIY project takes on a life of its own. Imagine meticulously crafting a bedroom scene, complete with a tiny porcelain doll seated at a vanity. You position everything with intention, crafting a narrative of quiet solitude. But then, you notice a subtle shift. The doll's head is tilted at a slightly different angle. A miniature book has fallen from the nightstand. At first, you dismiss it as a trick of the light, a product of your own overactive imagination, but the occurrences become more frequent, more deliberate. The unsettling truth dawns. You are no longer the sole architect of this haunted dollhouse. Something else is at play, an unseen force that interacts with your creation, altering its composition, rewriting its story. The carefully constructed narrative of loneliness morphs into something darker, something else. Perhaps the doll is no longer just a doll. Perhaps it's a conduit, a focal point for energies unseen, drawn to the concentrated intention and focused creativity you've poured into this miniature world. This is the terrifying potential of the haunted dollhouse DIY. It is more than just arts and crafts. It's an invitation to the unknown, to the specters that lurk just beyond the veil of our perception. And once that invitation is accepted, once the spirits find a foothold, there's no telling what stories they'll begin to tell. Are you ready to listen? Are you sure you want to know? Because the answers, I fear, may change you forever. Part 4. The silence that follows the completion of a haunted dollhouse is unlike any other silence you've experienced. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of waiting. A waiting that claws at the edges of your mind, whispering questions you're not sure you want answered. The room stands still, impossibly perfect in their miniature terror. Tiny chairs positioned just so, miniature portraits hanging askew, each detail a carefully considered invitation. But to whom? And for what purpose? Consider Sarah's story. Sarah, a seasoned dollhouse enthusiast, dismissed the warnings, the legends, the hushed whispers of paranormal communities. She saw only a creative outlet, a chance to build something beautiful, albeit unsettling. She meticulously crafted her haunted dollhouse, room by room, infusing it with her own energy, her own anxieties. Then the waiting began. At first it was subtle, a misplaced object, a door ajar that she swore she'd closed. But these anomalies escalated. Shadows flickered at the periphery of her vision. Unexplained whispers echoed in the dead of night. Sarah, initially dismissive, found herself drawn deeper into the mystery, compelled to document the strange occurrences. Her dollhouse, once a source of creative joy, became a focal point of inexplicable phenomena. She began to feel watched, a constant, unnerving presence that permeated her home. The miniature inhabitants of her dollhouse, once inanimate objects, now seemed to possess a life of their own, their painted eyes following her every move. The line between creator and creation blurred, and Sarah found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making, a nightmare that started with a simple DIY project. Are you willing to risk that line blurring in your own life? Are you prepared for the possibility that what you create might, in turn, begin to create you? Part 5. Sarah's descent into obsession deepened with each passing day. The dollhouse, once a source of creative joy, now felt like a malevolent entity, watching, waiting. The unsettling feeling of being observed intensified, not just within the confines of her home, but everywhere she went. She'd catch glimpses of movement from the corner of her eye, shadows that mimicked the tiny figures within the dollhouse. Sleep offered no respite. Night after night, Sarah was plagued by vivid dreams of the dollhouse. The miniature room stretched and twisted, morphing into grotesque parodies of her own home. The doll inhabitants, their painted smiles now sinister, would beckon her into their world. Their voices a chorus of whispers that promised understanding, yet radiated dread. One evening, while meticulously arranging the miniature furniture, Sarah noticed something peculiar. A tiny book, no larger than her thumbnail, had appeared on the dollhouse's library shelf. It was bound in faded leather and clasped with a minuscule silver lock. She hadn't placed it there. She knew she hadn't. A chill ran down her spine. With trembling hands, she managed to pry open the tiny lock. Inside, filled with an impossible number of pages, were handwritten inscriptions, words that seemed familiar, yet alien. As she strained to decipher the script, a voice, thin and reedy, echoed from within the dollhouse. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah. It's time to learn the truth." The room grew cold, and the shadows danced with renewed vigor. The miniature inhabitants stirred, their painted eyes gleaming with an unholy light. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was no longer in control. The dollhouse, and whatever resided within, was now calling the shots. The project, meant to soothe, had opened a doorway to something far beyond terror, something that had found a home within her. Part 6. The dollhouse hummed, a faint vibration that resonated through the floorboards and into Sarah's very bones. The voice, chillingly familiar despite never having heard it aloud, echoed within the confines of the room. "The truth," it rasped, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "About this house. About your house." Sarah felt a sudden lurch, a sickening drop in her stomach as the room around her seemed to waver, the edges blurring. The meticulous details she'd pored over, the tiny floral wallpaper and miniature furniture, seemed to shift and distort. Was this a hallucination, exhaustion, or something far more sinister? A cold spot settled in the center of the room, radiating outward. On the dollhouse's tiny porch, a miniature figure, dressed in a long, tattered gown, began to rock back and forth. It was the doll she had placed there days ago, the one with the unsettlingly vacant eyes. "This house," the voice continued, each syllable laced with an ancient weariness, has seen much sorrow, generations of pain, buried deep within its walls. You think you are merely building a replica, Sarah? You are unearthing a wound. A whisper of wind snaked through the room, extinguishing the single candle she had lit, plunging the space into near darkness. The only illumination came from the eerie glow emanating from within the dollhouse itself. They are not happy. You are here, the voice finished, the final word drawn out into a guttural growl. Sarah stumbled backward, knocking over a small table laden with crafting supplies. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, amplifying her fear. She was no longer alone. She was an intruder. The unseen residents of the dollhouse were making their displeasure known. Her innocent project had become a gateway, and something had crossed over. She had unwittingly invited them in. Part 7. Sarah scrambled to her feet, heart hammering against her ribs. The air in the room had grown noticeably colder, a stark contrast to the summer heat she'd been combating just moments ago. She told herself it was just the old house settling, the pipes groaning, her imagination running wild. But deep down, she knew something else was at play. She cautiously approached the dollhouse, her initial excitement replaced with a creeping dread. The miniature rooms, once a source of joy and creativity, now seemed to leer at her, the tiny furniture arranged in unsettling ways. A minuscule chair was overturned in the parlor, a picture frame hung askew in the bedroom, and a child's block lay on the floor of the nursery, spelling out a single, chilling word: leave. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just a coincidence, it wasn't just her imagination. Something was actively manipulating the dollhouse, sending her a message. But who, or what, was it? And why were they so insistent on her departure? Despite the growing fear, a strange sense of determination took hold. She'd come too far to back down now. This dollhouse, with its dark history and unsettling presence, held a secret, and Sarah was determined to uncover it. She decided to document everything, every strange happening, every chilling message. She grabbed her phone and began recording, her voice trembling slightly as she narrated the events. She knew it was a long shot. Just maybe someone else would believe her. Maybe someone else could help her understand the mystery that had taken root in her little project. A mystery that was now threatening to consume her. Part 8. With the phone recording, Sarah began, her voice a strained whisper. Day 1 of documenting the dollhouse. Strange occurrences have started. Messages, unsettling feelings. I don't know what's going on, but I need to figure it out. She focused the camera on the living room of the dollhouse. Everything looked normal, yet a shiver ran down her spine. Later that evening, while reviewing the footage, she noticed something odd. In one frame, a tiny rocking chair was still. In the next, it was moving ever so slightly. She muttered to herself, rereading the footage again. That's not normal. The following day, Sarah decided to rearrange the furniture in the dollhouse, hoping to disrupt whatever pattern might be causing the disturbances. She carefully moved each piece, noting its original position. That night, she set up a time-lapse camera to capture any changes. The next morning, she eagerly checked the footage. Nothing. Disappointed, she almost deleted it, but something compelled her to watch it one last time. That's when she saw it. Around 3 a.m., a miniature book had inexplicably fallen off a shelf. Not only that, but Sarah swore she saw a tiny, shadowy figure dart away from the bookshelf just before the book fell. Sarah zoomed in again and again, trying to make out the figure. It was grainy and indistinct, but undeniably there. Fear mixed with a strange sense of morbid curiosity washed over her. She knew with a growing certainty that she had stumbled upon something far beyond a simple DIY project. This dollhouse was not just haunted, it was actively trying to communicate something. And Sarah was determined to listen. Part 9. Sarah, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and morbid fascination, decided to dive deeper. Logically, the next step was to review the other footage. Hours melted away as she meticulously scanned every second of her dollhouse recordings. Most of it was mundane, dust motes dancing in the light, the occasional creak of the old house settling. But then she found it, another anomaly. In the dollhouse's kitchen, a miniature knife, normally resting neatly in a tiny wooden block, was now lying on the counter, glinting ominously under the LED lights. She hadn't moved it. She was certain. A shiver snaked down her spine. This wasn't just a haunting. It was deliberate, almost playful. The entity, or whatever it was, seemed to be testing her, leaving breadcrumbs of the bizarre for her to follow. But where did they lead? Driven by a relentless need to understand, Sarah started researching the history of the dollhouse itself. She remembered finding a faded inscription on the bottom, E.H. 1928. Could that be a clue? The local historical society proved surprisingly helpful. They had records of an Eliza Hawthorne who lived in the area and, intriguingly, had lost a child in a tragic accident in 1928. The details were sparse, but the librarian mentioned a local legend that Eliza, consumed by grief, had poured her heart and soul into a dollhouse, believing her lost child's spirit resided within. Could this be it? Was Sarah's DIY project unknowingly a conduit for something far older, far sadder, and potentially far more dangerous? The tiny shadowy figure, the moved knife, the inscription, it all seemed to point to a single, unsettling truth. The dollhouse wasn't just haunted, it was inhabited. And Eliza Hawthorne's grief might be the key to unlocking its secrets. Part 10. Eliza Hawthorne, clutching the chilling diary entries, felt a tremor run through her. The weight of her grief, already a crushing burden, was now compounded by a creeping dread. Could her innocent crafting project, born from the depths of despair, have inadvertently opened a door to something else? The tiny, shadowy figure glimpsed in the window of the dollhouse. The misplaced miniature knife. The cryptic inscription etched into the dollhouse's foundation. Each piece of the puzzle painted a disturbing portrait of a presence far beyond simple haunting. Eliza understood with a bone-chilling certainty that this was not a passive spirit merely lingering. It was an active entity, capable of influencing, perhaps even manipulating, the world around it. Driven by a desperate need to understand and protect her family, Eliza dove deeper into her research. She scoured local historical archives, poring over old town records, land deeds, and even forgotten newspaper articles, seeking any mention of the land on which her house stood, any whisper of tragedy or unexplained events. Days bled into nights as she pieced together fragments of the past, a growing unease settling in her stomach with each new discovery. One name kept surfacing: Silas Blackwood, a reclusive toy maker from the late 1800s, known for his intricate dollhouses, each rumored to possess a unique, unsettling quality. Blackwood vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of whispered tales and a collection of dollhouses that were said to bring misfortune to their owners. Could Sarah's DIY project unknowingly be somehow connected to Blackwood's dark legacy? Was the dollhouse a conduit, drawing something sinister from the past into their present? The answer, Eliza feared, was far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Part 11. Eliza, haunted by the unsettling events surrounding the dollhouse, delved deeper into the mystery of Arthur Blackwood. Her research led her to a forgotten archive, a repository of local lore and historical oddities. There, she unearthed a series of newspaper articles detailing Blackwood's life and, more disturbingly, the string of misfortunes that followed him. Families who purchased his dollhouses suffered inexplicable tragedies, fires, illnesses, and even disappearances. One article stood out, recounting the tale of a family who claimed their dollhouse was haunted by the spirits of its previous owners. They described chilling whispers, objects moving on their own, and a pervasive sense of dread that consumed their home. Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine. Could this be connected to the strange occurrences Sarah was experiencing? Was the dollhouse not just a harmless craft project, but a vessel for something sinister? Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Eliza sought out the descendants of the families mentioned in the articles. Each encounter painted a more disturbing picture of Blackwood and his dollhouses. They spoke of an obsession, a dark artistry that seemed to imbue his creations with a life of their own. One woman, her voice trembling, recounted a chilling dream where she saw Blackwood whispering incantations over a dollhouse, his eyes gleaming with an unholy light. Eliza began to suspect that Blackwood's dollhouses were more than just toys. They were imbued with something far more sinister. Was he deliberately summoning something into these miniature worlds, trapping spirits and unleashing them upon the unsuspecting? The thought sent a wave of nausea through her. She had to find a way to protect Sarah before it was too late. Part 12. Eliza knew she couldn't dismiss her mother's dream as mere fancy. The details were too vivid, the fear too palpable. She decided to delve deeper into Blackwood's past, searching for any clues that might corroborate her mother's unsettling vision. Days turned into nights as she scoured old newspapers, historical archives, and even obscure occult texts. She was driven by a growing sense of urgency, a gnawing feeling that Sarah was in grave danger. One evening, while poring over a dusty ledger from the local historical society, Eliza stumbled upon a record of a series of strange occurrences in the Blackwood family history. It spoke of a distant ancestor, a practitioner of dark arts, rumored to have used dollhouses as conduits for spirits. The ledger detailed rituals, whispered incantations, and symbols eerily similar to those Eliza had seen in her mother's dream. A cold dread washed over her as she realized the horrifying truth. Blackwood was following in his ancestors' footsteps, using the dollhouses to summon something malevolent. Eliza knew she had to act fast. She couldn't go to the police with such outlandish claims. They would dismiss her as delusional. Instead, she decided to confront Blackwood directly. She knew it was a risky move, but Sarah's safety was paramount. Gathering her courage, she prepared to face the darkness that lurked within Blackwood's world, praying that she wasn't already too late. The pieces were falling into place, each one more terrifying than the last, and Eliza braced herself for the confrontation that would determine Sarah's fate. What awaited her in Blackwood's workshop was beyond anything she could have imagined. Part 13. Eliza stepped into Blackwood's workshop, the air thick with the smell of varnish, dust, and something else, something metallic and unsettling. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. Shadows danced in every corner, playing tricks on her eyes, making it hard to discern what was real and what was not. The workshop was a chaotic mess of tools, doll parts, and half-finished creations. Discarded limbs lay scattered across workbenches. Glass eyes stared blankly from shelves, and spools of thread tangled around table legs like sinister vines. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she cautiously made her way deeper into the room, her senses on high alert. She called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Blackwood? Mr. Blackwood, are you here?" Silence answered her. Only the creaking of the old house and the distant howling of the wind filled the void. Eliza pressed on, her gaze sweeping over every inch of the workshop, searching for any sign of Sarah or any indication of what Blackwood was planning. Then she saw it. In the center of the room, bathed in the sickly yellow light, stood a dollhouse. But this was no ordinary dollhouse. This one was different, darker, more detailed. It was an exact replica of Blackwood's own house, down to the smallest detail. And inside, arranged meticulously within each room, were dolls that bore an uncanny resemblance to the people in Blackwood's life. His wife, his neighbors, and Sarah. Eliza's blood ran cold. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had stumbled upon something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. This dollhouse wasn't just a hobby. It was something else entirely. A trap, perhaps, far, far worse. She had to find Sarah, and she had to get her out of this house before it was too late. Before Blackwood decided to make Sarah a permanent resident of his twisted little world. Part 14. Eliza's mind raced. Blackwood's seemingly innocent hobby was a facade, a carefully constructed mask concealing something deeply disturbing. The miniature world he meticulously crafted was a reflection of his own twisted psyche, a place where he exerted control, and perhaps something far more sinister. Driven by a primal need to protect Sarah, Eliza started her investigation with a renewed sense of urgency. Every room in the dollhouse became a crime scene, each tiny detail holding a potential clue. She scrutinized the miniature furniture, the placement of the dolls, the subtle changes Blackwood had made since Sarah started visiting. Was he recreating scenes, reliving some past trauma? Or was he planning something far more immediate? The miniature version of the master bedroom sent a shiver down her spine. The doll representing Blackwood was positioned ominously close to the doll representing his wife. There was a disturbing stillness in the scene, a lack of life that felt suffocating. Eliza carefully examined the tiny figures. It was then she noticed something peculiar, a minuscule, almost imperceptible stain on the doll's hand. a shade of red that resembled dried blood. A wave of nausea washed over her. Could Blackwood have? No, she couldn't let her imagination run wild. But the evidence was mounting, the pieces of the puzzle slowly forming a terrifying picture. She needed to find concrete proof, something that would definitively link Blackwood to whatever darkness lurked within the walls of this house. And she needed to find Sarah before Blackwood's obsession consumed them all. Part 5. Driven by the chilling discovery, Emily resolved to delve deeper into Blackwood's past. She spent the next few hours poring over old town records, newspaper archives, and whatever she could find about him. The picture that emerged was one of a reclusive and eccentric man, always on the fringes of society, with a fascination for the occult and a penchant for collecting unusual artifacts. One particular article caught her eye, a report from decades ago about the disappearance of a young girl in the area. The case had never been solved, and the girl's name was eerily familiar: Sarah Jenkins. A cold dread washed over Emily as she realized the horrifying possibility. Could this be the same Sarah Blackwood had mentioned? Was the dollhouse a twisted recreation of that tragic event? The thought spurred her into action. She couldn't wait any longer. With renewed determination, Emily returned to the dollhouse, focusing on the rooms she hadn't thoroughly investigated. In the attic, tucked away in a dusty corner, she found a small wooden box. Her heart pounded as she opened it, revealing a collection of trinkets: a faded photograph of a young girl with bright, innocent eyes, a small worn teddy bear, and a silver locket engraved with the initials S.J. Emily's blood ran cold. It was Sarah. This was Sarah's room. But where was she now? A wave of nausea washed over her as she realized the horrifying implications. The dollhouse wasn't just a hobby for Blackwood, it was a macabre obsession, a twisted memorial to his dark deeds. Part 16. Emily's breath hitched in her throat. The locket, cold against her trembling fingers, felt like a physical manifestation of the dread that was now consuming her. S.J. Sarah Jenkins. The faded photograph, the innocent eyes staring back at her from beyond the veil of time. It all pointed to a single, horrifying conclusion. Blackwood hadn't just collected dollhouses. He'd collected victims. A chilling realization washed over her. The dollhouse wasn't just a representation of his dark deeds, it was a prison, a meticulously crafted miniature world where he trapped the essence, perhaps even the souls, of his victims. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She had to get out. She had to warn someone. But as she turned to leave, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room caught her eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Inside the dollhouse, in Sarah's room, the tiny teddy bear seemed to shift, its button eyes glinting unnaturally in the dim light. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it her imagination? Was the stress and the horror finally getting to her? She stared intently, trying to discern any further movement. Then she saw it again. A slight rocking motion, as if the bear were being gently nudged. A whisper, faint and ethereal, seemed to brush against her ear. "Help me!" Emily gasped, stumbling backward. The whisper was barely audible, yet it resonated deep within her, a desperate plea from beyond the veil. She looked back at the dollhouse, at Sarah's room, at the seemingly innocuous teddy bear. The air in the room grew colder, a spectral chill that pierced through her clothes and settled in her bones. Emily knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she wasn't alone, and that whatever was trapped inside that dollhouse wanted out. But could she risk unleashing something so malevolent, or was she already too late? Part 17. Emily hesitated, her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. The teddy bear. It seemed so ordinary, yet a prickling unease crawled up her spine. Was it merely a vessel, an innocent object tainted by something far more sinister? Or did it possess a sentience of its own? She decided to focus on the known facts, the pieces of Sarah's history she had uncovered. The old newspaper clippings, the whispered rumors of Sarah's troubled childhood, the unsettling silence surrounding her disappearance. Sarah had been a lonely child, withdrawn and isolated. Could the dollhouse have been her only solace, a sanctuary that somehow became a prison? Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility, Emily reached out, her fingers trembling, and gently picked up the teddy bear. It was surprisingly heavy, as if weighted down with sorrow. As she held it, the faint whisper returned, clearer this time, laced with palpable anguish. "Help me." The sound seemed to emanate not from the dollhouse, but from the very fabric of the room, weaving its way into her consciousness. Emily felt a wave of dizziness, a blurring of the edges of reality. The room seemed to distort, the shadows deepening, the air thick with an oppressive presence. She had crossed a threshold, she realized. The spirits trapped within the dollhouse were no longer confined to its miniature wall. They were reaching out, testing her, drawing her into their world of despair. And Emily, caught in their ethereal web, knew that turning back was no longer an option. The mystery of Sarah and the haunted dollhouse had consumed her entirely. Part 18. Emily's breath hitched in her throat. The oppressive feeling intensified, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. It was as if the very room was alive, breathing with a malevolent intent. She glanced around, her eyes wide with a primal fear, searching for the source of the growing dread. The dollhouse sat silently on the table, its miniature windows like dark, soulless eyes staring back at her. A faint whisper brushed against her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. It was a voice, barely audible, yet laced with an unbearable sadness. She couldn't decipher the words, but the emotion was unmistakable, a profound sense of loss and longing. The air grew colder, and Emily wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to emanate from within the dollhouse itself. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a sense of responsibility to uncover the truth, Emily reached out a trembling hand toward the miniature structure. As her fingers brushed against the dollhouse's wooden frame, a jolt of energy surged through her, causing her to recoil in shock. It was as if she had touched a live wire, the sensation leaving her hand numb and tingling. Undeterred, she steeled herself and reached out again, this time grasping the dollhouse firmly. She lifted it from the table, its weight feeling strangely heavier than it should. As she held it in her hands, she felt a connection to the spirits trapped within, a shared experience of sorrow and confinement. The dollhouse was more than just a collection of miniature rooms. It was a vessel, a prison for lost souls yearning for release. And Emily, in her quest to understand Sarah's story, was now inextricably bound to their fate. Part 9. Emily carried the dollhouse to her workspace, the dim light casting long, eerie shadows across the miniature rooms. Each tiny window seemed to stare back at her, reflecting her own growing unease. She set it down on the workbench, the wood groaning softly as if in protest. The air grew colder, a noticeable chill that raised goosebumps on her arms. Ignoring the sensation, she began to document every detail of the dollhouse, meticulously photographing each room, noting the placement of the furniture, the patterns on the wallpaper, and the unsettling stillness that permeated every corner. As she worked, she felt an inexplicable pull toward the attic room, the one Sarah had always kept locked. It was the epicenter of the dollhouse's strange energy, a place of profound darkness and hidden secrets. Emily hesitated, knowing that unlocking it might unleash something she wasn't prepared to face. But she couldn't resist. With trembling hands, she reached for the tiny key Sarah had given her, the metal cold against her skin. She inserted it into the lock, and with a soft click, the attic door swung open, revealing the room's hidden horror. Inside, the attic was shrouded in shadows, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. A single dilapidated rocking chair sat in the center of the room, its seat worn and faded, and in the corner, a small porcelain doll lay face down on the floor, its eyes staring blankly into the darkness. Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her, a sense of dread so intense it threatened to overwhelm her. What secrets did this attic hold? What darkness was she about to uncover? Part 20. Emily hesitated at the attic's threshold, the air growing colder with each breath. She reached into her pocket, fumbling for her phone. The flashlight app flickered to life, casting a weak beam into the shadowed space. The rocking chair creaked softly, as if someone, or something, had just been sitting there. Her pulse quickened. She stepped cautiously into the room, each footfall echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The beam of light danced across the dust-covered floor, illuminating grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in her peripheral vision. She forced herself to focus, to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The doll. She needed to examine the doll. Emily moved towards the corner, her heart pounding in her chest. As she got closer, she noticed something odd about the doll's clothing. It was wearing a miniature version of an antique dress, the same kind that had been popular in the late 1800s. The fabric was faded and torn, but she could see traces of intricate embroidery. It was far too elaborate for a simple toy. Kneeling down, Emily reached out and gently turned the doll over. Its porcelain face was cracked and stained, but its eyes seemed to follow her. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't just a doll. It felt wrong, almost alive, as if something resided inside. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the attic window, causing Emily to jump. She spun around, shining the flashlight towards the source of the noise. Nothing. Just the old warped window frame and a thick layer of dust. But as she turned back to the doll, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The doll was no longer lying face up. It was sitting upright, its porcelain eyes fixed directly on her. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on its lips. Emily stumbled backward, a silent scream trapped in her throat. This wasn't possible. Dolls didn't move on their own. Did they? Part 21. Emily scrambled to her feet, heart hammering against her ribs. The air in the attic felt thick, heavy, pressing down on her. She told herself it was just the dim light playing tricks on her eyes, a simple consequence of sleep deprivation and too much caffeine. Dolls don't just sit up. But the unsettling image lingered in her mind, refusing to be dismissed. Taking a shaky breath, she reached for her camera, fumbling with the power button. "Okay, Emily, document everything," she muttered, her voice trembling slightly. "Prove it's all in your head." She focused the lens on the dollhouse, zooming in on the doll sitting unnaturally upright in the nursery. Its painted eyes seemed to bore into the camera, a mocking glint in their glassy depth. She snapped a photo, then another and another, each click of the shutter echoing in the oppressive silence. As she reviewed the photos on the tiny screen, a wave of nausea washed over her. In each image, the doll's expression seemed to subtly shift, the faint smile widening ever so slightly. It was almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. A cold dread began to creep into her bones. This was beyond coincidence. This was wrong. She needed to get out of the attic. Now. But a morbid curiosity, a dark fascination, held her rooted to the spot. What was going on with this dollhouse? What secrets did it hold? She knew she should leave, abandon the project, but the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. Besides, a part of her wondered, what if she left and whatever was happening here followed her? Part 22. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the attic. The air grew colder, prickling her skin. Against her better judgment, she took a step closer to the dollhouse. The miniature living room, bathed in the soft glow of the flashlight, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. It was as if the tiny furniture, the minuscule portraits on the wall, were all holding their breath. Wait. She focused on the rocking chair. Was it her imagination, or had it shifted slightly? The thought sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across her arm. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, trying to reason with herself. "It's just a dollhouse. I'm tired, stressed. I'm seeing things." But the conviction in her voice faltered, drowned out by the growing unease. Suddenly, a faint whisper seemed to brush against her ear, too subtle to decipher, yet undeniably present. It sent a jolt of pure terror through her. She whirled around, scanning the shadows, but the attic remained stubbornly silent. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. Only the creaks and groans of the old house answered. The whispers returned, a chorus of faint voices, like static on an old radio. They seemed to emanate from the dollhouse, drawing her closer still. Leaning in, she squinted at the miniature figures inside. Two porcelain dolls, a man and a woman, stood frozen in place. Their painted eyes seemed to stare directly at her, accusing, knowing. Then, she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. The rocking chair. It swayed gently back and forth, back and forth as if occupied by an unseen presence. And from the rocking chair, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single chilling word. Leave. Part 23. The word hung in the air, a spectral command that resonated deep within Sarah's bones. Leave. But leave what? This house? This dollhouse? Or something more profound, something she couldn't quite grasp? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unnerving silence that followed the whisper. She wanted to retreat, to slam the basement door shut and pretend she'd never seen the dollhouse. But the sight of those porcelain dolls, their painted eyes boring into her, held her captive. They seemed to know something she didn't, to possess a secret that clawed at the edges of her sanity. With trembling hands, Sarah reached out and gently touched the glass casing of the dollhouse. It was cold, unnaturally so, as if drawing heat from her very touch. The rocking chair continued its slow, deliberate sway, a silent metronome marking some unseen rhythm. She peered closer, studying the miniature details of the room. A tiny, intricately woven rug lay on the floor. A miniature fireplace held meticulously crafted logs, and a small book sat open on a minuscule table. Each detail was perfect, a testament to the unknown craftsman's skill. Yet it was the dolls that drew her attention again and again. They were dressed in clothing that seemed oddly familiar, reminiscent of old photographs she'd seen of her grandparents. A chill snaked down her spine. This wasn't just a dollhouse, it was a tableau, a frozen moment in time. But whose time? And why did it feel so disturbingly personal? Sarah knew she should leave, heed the whispered warning, but the mystery had taken root. She was drawn in, compelled to unravel the secrets hidden within the miniature world. She had to know why this dollhouse had called to her, why it felt so profoundly connected to something deep within her own past. Before she could talk herself out of it, she made a decision. She would stay. She would investigate. She would discover the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. Part 24. Night had fully consumed the old house, casting long skeletal shadows that danced with the flickering candlelight. Sarah, armed with a notepad and a growing sense of unease, began her investigation. She started with the attic room, the one that had first sparked her morbid curiosity. Dust motes swirled in the air like tiny restless spirits as she meticulously examined the miniature furniture, the faded wallpaper, the child's drawings tacked to the wall. Each object seemed imbued with a silent story, a fragment of a life lived and abruptly abandoned. She noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the floorboards beneath the doll bed. Kneeling, she ran her fingers over the mark. It felt deliberate, not accidental. Could it be a clue? She documented it in her notepad, a tiny, insignificant detail that nonetheless felt heavy with meaning. Moving to the next room, the miniature kitchen, she found more disquieting details. The tiny porcelain plates were arranged as if a meal had just been served, but the food was long gone, leaving behind a faint, lingering odor, something metallic and unsettlingly familiar. It reminded her of the smell of blood, dried and aged. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't just a dollhouse. It was a stage for something far more sinister. As she delved deeper into the miniature world, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was not just observing, but being observed. The shadows seemed to watch her. The silence seemed to listen. Was she truly alone in this house? Or had she unwittingly invited something else in? Something that had been waiting patiently for her arrival? The thought sent a shiver of fear through her, a cold premonition that the secrets of the dollhouse were far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Part 25. As she delved deeper into the miniature world, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was not just observing, but being observed. The shadows seemed to watch her. The silence seemed to listen. Was she truly alone in this house? Or had she unwittingly invited something else in, something that had been waiting patiently for her arrival? The thought sent a shiver of fear through her, a cold premonition that the secrets of the dollhouse were far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Driven by a mixture of trepidation and morbid curiosity, Sarah decided to document her experience. She began setting up a small camera, capturing time lapses of the dollhouse, hoping to catch any unexplained movements or anomalies. During the day, the dollhouse seemed ordinary, a mere replica of a bygone era. But as night fell, The atmosphere changed. The shadows deepened, and the air grew heavy with an unsettling energy. One evening, while reviewing the footage, Sarah noticed something chilling. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker in one of the dollhouse windows. Rewinding, she watched again, and there it was. A brief, shadowy figure moving within the miniature room. It was gone in an instant, but the image was burned into her mind. It wasn't a trick of the light. Something was undeniably inside the dollhouse. Sleep became a distant memory. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside her window, sent shivers down her spine. The line between reality and the miniature world began to blur. Sarah found herself talking to the dollhouse, whispering questions into its tiny rooms, half expecting a response. Was she losing her mind, or was the dollhouse truly haunted? The answer, she feared, was lurking just beyond the veil of perception, waiting for her to cross over. Part 26. Sarah's descent was subtle at first. She'd find herself staring at the dollhouse for hours, lost in its intricate details, the tiny, perfectly replicated furniture, the minuscule portraits on the wall. She began to rearrange the furniture, not consciously, but as if compelled by an unseen force. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, the dollhouse looming in the darkness, and feel an overwhelming urge to change the placement of a chair or shift a miniature book on a shelf. One evening, while rearranging the dollhouse furniture yet again, she found a small, almost imperceptible scratch on one of the tiny wooden chairs. It was a new mark, one she was sure hadn't been there before. A chill ran down her spine. Could this be the work of the entity she felt was now residing within the dollhouse? Or was her mind finally succumbing to the insidious influence of this strange object? Days turned into nights filled with a growing sense of dread. Sarah started having vivid dreams of walking the halls of the dollhouse, navigating its claustrophobic rooms. In her dreams, the dolls moved, their painted eyes following her every move. Whispers filled the miniature space, hushed and unintelligible, yet undeniably menacing. The whispers began to bleed into her waking hours. Faint murmurs, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the dollhouse, just beyond the threshold of hearing. She would strain her ears, trying to decipher the source, but the whispers would always fade, leaving her in a state of heightened anxiety and paranoia. The line between dream and reality was dissolving, and Sarah was slowly losing her grip. Part 27. Sarah decided to document everything. She started a journal, meticulously recording every whisper, every unsettling movement within the dollhouse. She sketched the shifting furniture arrangements, the subtle changes in the doll's expressions. She even tried recording audio, hoping to capture the whispers and analyze them. But all she got was static. One evening, while reviewing her notes, Sarah noticed a recurring symbol carved into the base of the dollhouse, a spiral. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath layers of old paint. Driven by a desperate need to understand, she researched the symbol. Her search led her to obscure occult texts, tales of ancient rituals used to bind spirits to objects. The spiral, she discovered, was often used as a conduit, a focal point for paranormal energy. A chilling realization washed over her. The dollhouse wasn't just haunted, it was a vessel. Something was using it to communicate, to influence her. The whispers weren't random. They were a deliberate attempt to break through her defenses, to infiltrate her mind. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah knew she couldn't simply ignore the dollhouse anymore. She had to confront whatever entity dwelled within its miniature wall. But how could she fight something she couldn't see, something that existed beyond the realm of the tangible? The thought of confronting this unseen force filled her with dread, but she also knew that she couldn't continue living in a state of constant fear and paranoia. She had to find a way to sever the connection, to exorcise the entity from the dollhouse before it completely consumed her. The dollhouse possessed secrets, and Sarah was now determined to unlock them, no matter the cost. Part 28. Sarah began her research, poring over ancient texts and occult books, searching for any mention of entities that could attach themselves to objects. She learned of rituals, incantations, and protective symbols, each promising a solution, yet none felt quite right. There was a unique darkness to what she was experiencing, a personalized torment that defied the generic remedy. One evening, while sifting through a particularly dusty tome, She stumbled upon a passage detailing the importance of understanding the entity's origins. It spoke of echoes, lingering imprints left by traumatic events, which could manifest as malevolent spirits. Could the dollhouse be a vessel for such an echo, a relic of some past tragedy? Driven by this newfound insight, Sarah decided to delve into the history of the house where she had found the dollhouse. She spent hours at the local library, sifting through old newspapers and historical records. The house had been the site of a series of unexplained deaths in the early 20th century, a family plagued by misfortune and madness. The details were vague, shrouded in whispers and speculation, but Sarah sensed a connection. Could the entity be tied to these past events, a fragment of the suffering that had permeated the house? If so, perhaps by understanding the tragedy, she could find a way to release the entity, to sever its connection to the dollhouse, and ultimately to herself. The task was daunting, but Sarah knew that she couldn't afford to back down. The dollhouse held secrets, and she was determined to unearth them, even if it meant confronting the darkness that lurked within her own mind. Part 29. Driven by a newfound purpose, Sarah delved deeper into the historical records of the house and the family that had once resided within its walls. She spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers, census data, and property. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became, revealing a tragic tale of loss and despair. The family, the Whitlocks, had suffered a series of devastating blows. The patriarch, Thomas Whitlock, had lost his fortune in a bad investment, leaving the family teetering on the brink of financial ruin. His wife, Eliza, succumbed to a long and debilitating illness, leaving behind two young children, Samuel and Abigail. Samuel, the elder, bore the brunt of his father's grief and resentment, while Abigail, withdrawn and fragile, sought solace in her dolls and the miniature world she created within her dollhouse. Sarah discovered that Abigail had died tragically young, a victim of a childhood illness that swept through the Thomas, already broken by the loss of his wife and fortune, was unable to cope with the death of his daughter. Consumed by grief and despair, he shuttered the house and disappeared, leaving behind the dollhouse as a silent testament to his family's shattered dreams. Could Abigail's spirit be trapped within the dollhouse, reliving her final moments, yearning for the love and comfort she had lost? The thought sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She realized that the entity she had encountered was not malevolent, but rather a lost and frightened soul, clinging to the only world it had ever known. Determined to help Abigail find peace, Sarah knew that she had to find a way to connect with her, to reassure her that she was not alone, and to guide her towards the light. But how could she reach out to a spirit trapped within the confines of a dollhouse, a world of miniature proportions and untold secrets? Part 30. Sarah felt a profound sense of responsibility. Abigail, trapped in her miniature world, needed help, and Sarah was the only one who could offer. But how could she bridge the gap between the living and the spectral, between her reality and the dollhouse's eerie dark? Days turned into weeks as Sarah delved deeper into the history of the house and its inhabitants. She spent hours researching local archives, poring over old newspapers and census records, searching for any mention of the family who had once lived there, especially any information about a young girl named Abigail. Finally, she found a small, faded article tucked away in a corner of the library. It spoke of a tragic accident, a fire that had claimed the lives of a family, their house reduced to ashes. Only a dollhouse had survived, miraculously untouched by the flames. Could this be the key to understanding Abigail's? Armed with this new knowledge, Sarah returned to the dollhouse, a sense of determination filling her. She decided to try a different approach, one that involved empathy and understanding. She began speaking to Abigail, not as a ghost, but as a lost child. She shared stories of her own childhood, her own fears and hopes, creating a connection based on shared humanity. Slowly, subtly, she sensed a change. The oppressive atmosphere in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of tranquility. The shadows seemed to recede, and the dollhouse, once a source of dread, now felt almost peaceful. One evening, as Sarah sat beside the dollhouse, she felt a gentle touch on her hand, a fleeting sensation that sent shivers down her spine. She looked down at the dollhouse and saw a faint, ethereal glow emanating from within. A small voice, barely audible, whispered, "Thank you." Sarah knew that Abigail had finally found. She had helped her to let go of her earthly ties and move on to the next chapter of her existence. The dollhouse, once a prison, was now a vessel of release, and Sarah, the unwitting caretaker, had played a crucial role in Abigail's journey. The experience left an indelible mark on Sarah. She learned that even in the darkest corners of the supernatural, there is always room for compassion and understanding, and that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery come not from confronting our fears, but from embracing our empathy. If you've been captivated by Sarah's journey and the mysteries she unraveled, be sure to subscribe for more chilling tales from far beyond terror. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a haunting story.